had seen pictures of people swimming in an ocean or a body of water surrounded by jellyfish, but the jellyfish weren't stinging them. And she wanted to know more about these jellyfish. Well, those jellyfish are called golden jellyfish, and they are actually part of Jellyfish Lake in Palau. What ended up happening is they follow the daily migration of the sun's arc across the sky, which means that they are never in the same spot as their main predator, which are sea anemones. The other thing is that this lake used to be part of the ocean, but there was a barrier kind of created naturally. So they don't ever leave this lake. So over the years, they have adapted that they do not need their stingers. So they've lost the ability essentially to sting. So when you're swimming with them, it's completely safe. They can't sting you. They're very small. They're adorable. There's a ton of them all in this little lake, and they are golden, and they're about the size of my palm. So that's the pictures that this member of 10 by 2020 was seeing, and she wasn't sure. So those are in Palau, and at their largest, they're about 5.5 inches, or they fit into a teacup. That's kind of how you can think of how big or how small in this case they are. And it's interesting because they actually need the light to survive. They feed off of algae, which is their main food is through the sunlight, so photosynthesis. And they're not really afraid of anything. I mean, like jellyfish normally, you can't see fear in their eyes, but there's thought to be like well over 5,000 in this lake. So when you're swimming, it's kind of like that scene from Finding Nemo when they're going through the jellyfish where you're just bopping off of them. And it's completely safe. And it is a tourist attraction, but it also raises awareness for Palau's waters, which is some of the most pristine waters known to man. So that is the answer to what golden jellyfish are. Then I got another question, which fits in perfectly right now. Who is Davy Jones and what is his locker? So a fellow 10 by 2020 campaign member, I guess, was watching the Pirates of the Caribbean movie and realized that he had heard a lot about this Davy Jones guy and his locker, but wasn't sure where this kind of came from. And what I thought would be kind of an easy answer to find wasn't so easy. There are a lot of different legends that it's based off of, and it's less of a pirate legend and more of a sailor's legend. So its first appearance, to say, is in a 1594 song called Jones Ale is New, written by a London pub owner. But then it came back in the 1630s as a name of a pirate who used to be in the Indian Ocean. What Davy Jones represents, though, is first off, the locker. Back then it wasn't like a gym locker that you and I would say, but it's any sort of treasure chest or any box that has a lock. And Davy Jones's locker refers to the bottom of the ocean, and Davy Jones is sometimes said to represent either the devil or kind of this creepy demon of the sea. So when someone is going to Davy Jones's locker, it's saying that they're going to the spirit of the sea, or that they are like going to die, they're being thrown overboard, everything like that. The most kind of famous reference to Davy Jones was in 1726 in the book The 4 Years' Voyage of Captain George Roberts by Daniel Defoe. And it's at that point that it became kind of related to this idea of misfortune, and you don't want to go there, and it's the bottom of the sea, and it's some sort of bad thing. So it's been around for hundreds of years, and it's been referenced in books and movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, and even in songs. And the U.S. Navy song actually includes a reference to Davy Jones. Peter Pan references it, as well as Treasure Island. So it's kind of one of those weird myths that have gone through time and time. So, and then the last question, which is kind of a good segue, is how deep is the ocean really? And this is like a very hard thing to imagine. So I found a great video that is going to show you, and it's really good at kind of putting it into a perspective. Can you guys see it?
Ya, sí, los marinos. Es una parte del océano que está descubierta, es una parte muy...
So that is a quick video on how deep the ocean is. So pretty much you can go and climb Mount Everest, put a couple of Eiffel Towers on top of, or not, yeah, Mount Everest, and still not be in what we think is the deepest part of the ocean. Because as we know, the ocean is very, very large, both in depth and also in width. So we're not sure if Mariana's Trench is considered, it is the deepest point that we know right now. But for all we know, there's another part of the ocean that it goes even deeper. And it is true that James Cameron went down to explore. James Cameron, most notably the director of Avatar and I believe Titanic and all that. So he did go down and explore for some fun. And that was a BuzzFeed video, which was really, really cool. I happen to love BuzzFeed. So the idea that they kind of took the time to answer this question is very cool. As I said before, I kind of am going a little bit off of what I consider my topic, but I feel like this is a really important thing. So I don't know if anyone saw, but it is actually trending on Facebook right now. Today, a baby dolphin that is actually an endangered species was killed after being passed around so people could take selfies with it in Argentina. It's called a Franciscan dolphin, and it's thought that only 30,000 species exist, or 30,000 exist in the world right now. So it is considered a threatened species. There are pictures, but also there's a video, and it shows a man holding up the dolphin on a beach in the Buenos Aires province, and people were nudging closer, almost like a mob, to get closer to the animal. And then another photo shows it actually dead on its side. It was a baby, which makes it even sadder because it is a threatened species. The Wildlife Foundation in Argentina did speak up, and it says that this occasion serves to inform the public of the urgent need to return these dolphins to the sea. It is vital that people help to rescue these animals because every single one counts. It is one of the smallest kinds of dolphins in the world. Really, at their largest, they grow to about 5.5 feet in length. It has a very interesting skin, but the problem is that because its skin is very thick and greasy, it gets dehydrated very, very quickly. So under the International Union for Conservation of Nature, it is listed as vulnerable. And it's usually found in the waters near Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. So I kind of wanted to open this up as, do you think that this is taking our love of selfies and the need for a good pic too far, that this very innocent baby endangered animal had to die just because people wanted a picture with it? Anybody want to chime in? I was thinking about showing the video, but I don't know if it would be like very upsetting for some people. I know that when I first saw it, I actually thought it was a joke. My friend sent it to me, and I didn't really look at it at first because I thought it was, oh, someone found a dolphin and rescued it, and isn't that nice? But then I realized that it wasn't something so nice. So one thing that people are saying is that this incident might provide more support and information about this kind of endangered species. And people have been kind of the backlash. People have been tweeting and kind of tagging this idea of ignorance and stupidity of taking this animal from essentially its habitat just to get a picture with it. And it's been picked up by news stations all around the world. BBC, Epic, Independent, Daily Mail, ABC, New York Daily News. It's really like it has blown up. And I don't know if it's because dolphins are kind of one of those quintessential species, so people kind of relate more to dolphins after seeing movies about them or maybe seeing a show with dolphins or swimming with them, and they're very like a very traditional animal. Or if it's because really truly this is something that we need to kind of speak out about, the idea of interacting with wild animals, either taking them directly from the sea or even when you see a washed up animal itself. And the fact that it's a living, breathing animal. So I kind of wanted to just bring that to all of your attentions and maybe keep on the lookout for, I'm sure that there will be some sort of action step relating to this, but this literally just happened today. And it has blown up. If you go onto Facebook and type in dolphin or Argentina, these are the first things that come up. And they're kind of still reporting on it as we speak. So they're trying to find the people who took the selfies and the pictures and see what their reasoning was, or lack thereof of reasoning, as I'd like to say. So I would suggest keep your eyes open for that.
Could I just
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, and I imagine that there would be a lot of interesting, I don't know if anyone on the call is a psych major, but I imagine there's a lot of kind of crowd behavior that just made the situation so much worse. I think it's like the opposite of the bystander effect, which I don't know what that would be called, but I think this can be extrapolated to so many other issues where, you know, a few people do something and then suddenly everyone's doing it without really taking heed to consequences. So I'm not sure if anyone's reading the news and thinking that deeply into it, but hopefully, yeah, you're right. I hope people walk away from this with a better understanding and act maybe differently if the situation were to ever happen again.
No, I have to agree. And I mean, like, it even could be almost this sense of, I imagine, peer pressure is you see everyone rushing towards, as if it was a celebrity. You see everyone rushing towards something with their cameras out. You want to take your camera out because whatever is happening, it must be exciting. It must be something important. But instead of it being a celebrity, it's a dolphin. So it's an interesting, I agree, like it could be interesting from almost like a sociological, psychological point of view. Because dozens of people came to take pictures and to touch it and to pick it up, even though I'm sure subconsciously or even consciously they knew maybe I shouldn't be touching this baby dolphin that was taken from the ocean. But it's a heat of the moment kind of thing. And I mean, like, I know that sometimes in the heat of the moment, I can do some really silly things, but I would like to think that I would stop before something like that happens, but that's just me. So that's just me. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this story develops. Hopefully, like I said, the World Wildlife Foundation or other conservation groups will get something positive out of this, whether it's awareness or bringing kind of more attention to not just the animal, but best practices of how do you deal with wildlife that's been washed up or on the beach or that you see. Should you touch it? Should you inform someone? Because it can be very hard to tell, especially with marine animals. Is this species swimming or is it in distress? Is it okay that it's over here, or is this like a bad sign? Did it get swept up? I once was at the beach in New Jersey, and I saw a seahorse, and it was in the very thin bits of water. So I went and I kind of pushed it back so it would go deeper because I knew that, one, the seahorses are usually never that close to shore. Two, it was at risk of being washed up. And three, that I wasn't touching it. I was just helping to push the water and it back into where it can swim away because it was so shallow that it couldn't swim. But if I didn't know what to do, I probably would have tried to find a lifeguard who maybe knows a phone number of, like, pretty much every beach town has some sort of nature, conservation, wildlife protection group. Someone who knew what to do, even a fisherman, because they probably encountered this before. So it's kind of an interesting study on how do people react, especially in a group setting. So going to be interesting to see how that goes up. Keeping up with current events, there are some new marine protected areas announced, which is really cool. They just announced a new MPA, I believe, in South Africa. I'm going to pull it up so I make sure that I'm saying the right things. But this is great because 2016, we're going to try to get even closer to our 10% goal. Last time I checked, we're at a little over 4%, which is good. It's closer to the 10%, but we are not there quite yet. So, yeah, here we go. South Africa proposed marine protected areas, which is great. It's their Department of Environmental Affairs, and they're proposing 22 new MPAs all along South Africa's shores. And they are inviting the public to comment on the concept. So their reasoning for creating MPAs is actually to up the amount of ocean biodiversity. So right now, the ocean biodiversity is less than 1%, and they want to get it up to 5%, according to a representative from the Department of Environmental Affairs. So it is a step in the right direction, but there are some issues with the idea of MPAs and places that really rely on fishing. So it actually ended with a high court order to stop a fishing program in the marine protected area because they were opposing the marine protected area as kind of an infringement on their rights, which it can be considered that, because these are fishermen who need this not only to feed their family, but to get money, to keep their houses, to send their children to school, everything like that. So the idea of 22 new areas that they couldn't really fish is a little bit distressing for them. But they are hopeful that these 22 proposed marine protected areas will go through. And it's called the Wildlife and Environmental Society of South Africa. They're helping to inform their Department of Environmental Affairs, or DEA, in creating these 22 different marine protected areas. So that's a good amount, especially from South Africa, which has some of the most pristine waters. And they have a lot of interesting habitats. So they have coastal wetlands, mangroves, reefs, and they're also looking at this as a preventative policy. So by ensuring that these things like mangroves and coastal wetlands are safe, they're helping to protect coastal communities from rising sea levels, extreme weather, storm surges, and protecting spawning grounds for different marine species that help sustain the fisheries and ensure the long-term benefits such as food and job security. So while there are some concerns, overall, it seems like this is going to be a really good step in the right direction. So, and then there was news from Palau today. Let's see. All about Palau and the poachers, which at a previous, I actually want to say it was our first forum, I showed a video of Palau's response to what's called IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated. If you didn't see that video, I can sum it up really quickly. They took the boats that were illegally fishing in their waters. They took everyone off of the boats. They took the captains. They arrested the captains. They put everyone from the boats back on 2 of them and sent them home. And with the other 4 boats, they put them in the middle of their ocean and set them on fire. Which, Palau is a very tiny, tiny island, developing state. And that was a very large kind of statement. So, but this article that was actually just released yesterday by the New York Times is called Palau versus the Poachers. And it's about their aggressive response to illegal fishing and how the way that they protect themselves may help the rest of the world save the oceans. I'm going to post this article in our Facebook group so you could give it a read. But it's very interesting how Palau, it talks about how Palau employs a marine police division with 18 members and 1 patrol ship to cover about 230,000 square miles of ocean. Lots of ocean, not a lot of people. And the fact that it is still one of the most protected areas, especially known for its aggressive response. So it was one of the first nations to ban bottom trawling, which is similar to strip mining on land. It prohibited commercial shark fishing in 2009. It created the world's first shark sanctuary. It is trying to ban or to lessen the amount of tuna longliners. And they've actually taken with Greenpeace to Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding platform, to raise money to support its conservation work. And they are one of the first places to create a no-take reserve, and that was in 2015. And that means that you cannot fish there, you cannot boat in there, you cannot swim in there, you cannot look at it. It is the strictest of all kind of marine protected areas. So I'm going to be posting that article. It's a little bit long, but once again, really, really interesting. And it gives a cool perspective on how they go about protecting when there's 18 members of their marine division and 1 boat, which is not a lot, very much not a lot. So, Okay, as we know, the theme of this forum is global perspectives, and this kind of is a very important topic to me because I'm from the East Coast, so I spent most of my childhood only ever at the Atlantic. And it was kind of hard for me to imagine the other oceans, especially because if you think about it, all of our oceans are connected. It's not like there's fences or barriers. So I actually just got back from California where I forced a friend to go see the Pacific Ocean with me. And he was very confused. He's like, well, don't you have the Atlantic? Like, you live on Long Island. You see the ocean all the time. I'm like, but it's different. You don't get it. Like, it's different. It's a different ocean. Everything about it is different, even though it looks the same. The sand is different. The animals are different. The fact that the sun sets onto the ocean because it's the West Coast is different. And he kind of stopped and he was like, I never really thought about it like that. I was like, no, most people don't, especially because the Atlantic and the Pacific, they touch the same country. It's all the United States. But the truth of the matter is, historically, people have been doing different things. One great example is looking at how people have used the oceans for food. So, for example, in New Zealand, Maori fishing, and I apologize if I'm going to botch some of these words because I'm going to try to say them in the native language, which once again, I guarantee nothing. They used a lot of different pots. So they used something called a taruke kura, which is a pot solely meant for catching crayfish, which was one of their main sources of food. They also used what are called hinaki, which is meant to capture eel, and a titoko ika, which was a hand net. So they had all these different pots and nets meant specifically for certain types of fish. They also made fish hooks, but they made them out of wood, bone, and puua shell. So the hooks weren't actually all that sharp. They were only meant to get the fish to come to them, and then they could net them, not like how we're used to where it actually hooks the fish. They also were known to use like these kind of dual grouping fishing. So what would happen is one person would stay at one spot and run a line to another person, and it would be a large net, not very deep, but very long. And they would hold it across, and they would wait for the fish to swim in, and then they would time it to flip the net up. So it wasn't just one person fishing for themselves. It was almost like a group activity. Then going kind of very different, if you look at the Inuit fishing of Nunavut rivers, which I believe is in Canada, I'm pretty sure. They used less nets and more stones, actually. So they would create stone weirs at the mouth of these rivers, and that wall would essentially trap fish, and they could just go into this almost created lake and just take the fish out. They also used spears, which were usually three-pronged with the central kind of longer and then two a bit farther. So they were used to kind of grasp the fish like a fork would. And instead of keeping their fish in nets, they used string, a needle and a string, to sew the fish together to hold them. So these are two very, very different ways of fishing. And this is, of course, is kind of more historical perspective of fishing, but not a lot really has changed between then and now. We use nets still, although our nets are quite a bit larger. We use hooks. We use trawling lines, which are similar to the giant nets. We've been known to make dams or weirs to keep our fish. So it's interesting to see that these two very, very different historical methods are still used today on a larger scale. And then I had, which I was actually really excited for, I was trying to think of what can we talk about for the oceans and kind of a global perspective. And I was in class And my friend suggested, well, why don't you talk about the different ocean deities? Because all different cultures have different deities that were related to water. And a lot of them had things in similar. And I was like, wow, I've never even thought of that. Because outside of like Poseidon/Neptune from Greek and Roman, I never really thought about different kind of gods and goddesses. So I went and I found some, and I was amazed at how similar they really can be. So once again, apologizing for botching any of these names. The Aztecs had a goddess named Chalchiuhtlicue, and that name translates to Woman of the Jade Skirt or Lady Precious Green Stone Skirt. Sorry, the lights keep going off. And she is the goddess of running water and springs, rivers, and lakes. And she's considered one of the most important deities. She's the protectress of children and newborns. And she also protected fishermen, and quite a lot of the Aztec culture relied on fish and fishermen. And she's thought to kind of be an inspiration for people, although it's said that her inspiration affects people quickly like a moving river. Her name is also can be translated into woman who makes the waves swell. So it was thought that she controlled the seas and the sea storms. So if she was angry, that would mean there would be a bad storm and people could be put at risk. So a lot of times they would make offerings to her. Moving to like completely different, there is Manannán mac Lir, which is Old Irish and is a sea deity in Irish mythology, and it's a him. And he is most often pictured in his boat, which he named Scuba Tween, which is wave sweeper, or he's seen in a sea-borne chariot drawn by the horse Enbar, and he has a powerful sword and a cloak of invisibility. He's considered the guardian of the other world and is known to ferry souls into the afterlife, which is actually very similar to the Egyptian kind of god. And he is kind of synonymous with the Welsh figure who has a similar name. And he is thought to keep merchants and fishermen safe. So they would often make little boats and put votives in it and sail them off as an offering. And he's still today, there's actually very large sculptures throughout Ireland, kind of near the seaside, to honor Manannán mac Lir, which is a mouthful to say. But I thought it was really interesting that he is similar to the Egyptian. Then this one was the coolest, in my opinion. Daku Waka, which is from the Fijian mythology, or the Isle of Fiji, is a shark god. He is greatly respected by fishermen because he protects them from danger and also protects their boats and makes sure that they have a good fishing season. And he is most often pictured with the legs of a man, the torso of a man, but then the head of a fish, but sometimes wearing a man's mask. So his torso kind of is where he turns into a shark, although legend has it that he can change into the shape of anything because his body is like the waves. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the last one that I have moving is Sumiyoshi Sanji, which is actually 3 Shinto gods. And they're regarded as the gods of sea and sailing in Japanese culture. They are also considered very, very important. And it's thought that they got their names actually from the 3 main stars in the Orion constellation, which was commonly used when sailing to figure out where they were for navigational purposes. So that's where their name is thought to come from. But looking at all these, it was interesting to me that they had kind of a lot of similarities in not only how they look, but their protection, who they see, who they protected. And it was interesting to me that it wasn't just men and women, but it was also duality. So like the shark man and goddesses and everything like that. So I thought that was really, really cool. And then I had a request for a National Geographic video that someone had actually shown me, and she would love if I shared it with you guys. So I'm going to do that now. Let me figure out share screen. Got it.
Many people look at the ocean and they see water. But it's not just water. It is a living system that shapes the character of the planet.
Hubungan kita masyarakat itu antara laut sama ada dengan anak kita atau tubuh kita sama saja.
The ocean gives us more than half of the oxygen we breathe. It regulates the climate, and it gives us all this seafood and recreational opportunities.
The ocean is an enormous blue opportunity, able to provide us with life, with leisure, with commerce, with industry, all of the fundamental underpinnings to a sustainable economy.
The healthy ocean translates into economic growth and development. Necesitamos dirigir nuestra mirada hacia los océanos. Océanos saludables garantizan a su vez riqueza y prosperidad. We have changed the ocean. We've lost 90% of the big fish in the sea. We've seen a decline and loss of about half the coral reefs and a growth of dead zones.
We're also seeing effects on all kinds of marine species. We have to have a healthy ocean. It provides so much to us that we just take for granted.
Sin arrecife vivo, no hay playas. Sin arrecife vivo, no hay pesca. No hay atractivos visuales que traen a gente a bucear, a snorkelear, a ver aves.
We need those oceans to be healthy if we're going to continue to feed what is an rapidly growing population.
When you live in the fishing communities, you start wondering, what is happening to us? What is happening to me as an individual? When you start wondering that way, then the bigger question that comes in, what is happening to my future?
The ocean is part of our life. It's fundamental for us. If we don't protect that in the long term, we die.
12% of the land is protected in national parks or reserves. In the ocean, less than 2% is protected.
Sabemos que en el futuro nos va a rendir no lo que vamos a ganar, a lo mejor el doble de lo que debimos de ganar si nosotros vamos a pescar en este momento. Entonces, ese es el valor que nosotros le estamos dando a los recursos pesqueros.
This is one area of investment where the returns are so easy to see.
It's a good investment because no one has more at stake than companies. Without the resource, there's no company. So it's in the company's best interest to invest for the future.
Tubuh kita memang sudah hancur, berarti kita juga karena kekayaan atau keindahan, kenapa kesejahteraan kita itu letakkan dalam laut.
There's going to be a great opportunity for people to make a difference. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, feed people.
if we look after the ocean will look after us.
The world needs a new philosophy. Not a philosophy of competition, but a philosophy of cooperation. We survive or we perish together. No one group can survive alone.
So I thought that was a really good video, especially with our theme going on for global perspectives, how this video had so many different countries represented and people speaking on behalf of the countries saying, we need to protect our oceans. We as a world, not just as a separate country or even as a town or a tribe, we together need to protect our oceans, because if we don't do this, we will perish together. And you can see that one thing that all these countries have in common is they rely on the ocean. They rely on the ocean in so many different ways, whether it's for economic growth or for their community and a way of life or feeding their family, for cultural value. There's so much more to it. And that's something that we see on a global perspective. We might have different cultures, we might fish differently, and we might blame our neighbors for the way that we treat our oceans. But the fact of the matter is that we're all in this together, and we as a world need to treat our oceans better. So that was run through, it was actually a National Geographic video, but it was for a global partnership for the oceans. And that video, it's worth noting, was made in 2012. So we are, like I said, up to about 4% of the world's oceans protected. So that's like a pretty good kind of jump between 2012 to 2014, or excuse me, 2016, to see that doubling. But the Global Partnership for Oceans is an alliance of well over 140 governments, international organizations, civil society groups, private sector interests, but they're all committed to addressing the threats that affect the health, productivity, and resilience of the ocean. Most notably, they try to tackle overfishing, pollution, and habitat loss because they see that these three problems are contributing the most to the depletion of natural resources that will affect livelihoods and ecosystem services for like the next up until 2050 and beyond. And they have a lot of really good kind of workers within them. They have scientists along with communities. They work with the World Bank. They've worked with the United Nations, the Global Environmental Facility. So they're a really, really great organization. And they're continuing their work to this day. So they've been around for quite some time, especially when you think about it from a conservation point of view, because conservation, sometimes things last, sometimes they don't. But they've spoken at a lot of different councils, including management of tuna fisheries and biodiversity conservation. They have a very big say in kind of putting things on lists, whether for overfishing or for underfit or like protection. So they're a really great organization. If you're more interested in global partnership or global perspective of oceans, I definitely suggest looking them up, and I'll have the links and a really cute, like really nice, informative PowerPoint to go with it. So let's see. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes,
Yes.
actually. I don't know if anyone else picked up on this, but there was a global agribusiness person in the video.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more information on that? Or like, I just saw him appear and I thought that given his title, it's awesome that he is a part of this, but also like I'm kind of confused how agribusiness plays into this.
Well, Yeah, I agree. And I was kind of, when I first watched that, I was a little wary of that. But the thing is that really big business is here to make money. And more business is realizing that the way that we are treating our, whether it's oceans or even land, farming, there is a chance that we're going to mess up so badly that they can't make a profit off of it. Because if they make their money through fishing and there's no more fish, they're going to be out of business as much as people who fish just for themselves. There are actually summits that happen it's called the International Business Alliance for Corporate Ocean Responsibility. And they happen pretty much, this is going to be their 4th year. And it's an international multi-sectoral business event that is dedicated to sustainable development, science, and stewardship of the seas, and is now an annual event. So every year they have a theme. So the 2016 theme is Ocean 2030, Sustainable Development Goals in the Ocean Business Community. And it's talking about putting these sustainable development goals, specifically SDG 14, with scientists and marine science and business, and finding how can we have these business meets sustainability kind of times and areas. And it has been successful. We even see, like with our last forum in sustainable seafood, the Seafood Watch, melding business with good practices that relate to sustainability. And the idea of knowing where your food comes from. People tend to like that, so it's a good business move. It's not always a good business move, like when they outright banned or took off their list that one species. People ended up just getting it from their competitors. So it's kind of an interesting balance to see between what works for business and sustainability and what doesn't. So does that answer your question?
Cool. That was great. Thank you.
Let's see. What was the next thing that I was going to talk about? And in case you guys did not see, at about 6:30, we're going to have Dr. Tara Ryder come on and talk to us. She's a maritime historian with her focus in pirates. And if I remember correctly, in female pirates, which is pretty awesome. I think that's really cool. Oh, yes. I keep forgetting to do this. Another quick update from 10 by 2020. We are going to be at New York University in the next couple of weeks, which we're very, very excited for. I know. We're going to be talking to some NYU students with the other global campaign leaders from Millennium Campus Conference 2015. So I'm very excited to see them again. I asked if it was going to be live streamed or recorded. It's not going to be live streamed, but they are going to try to get someone to either take photos or record it so you can see what we're talking about. But I will make the PowerPoint we'll be presenting available to everyone with my notes in the bottom. So even if you can't hear me, you can read through it and see what we're kind of talking about and what we're talking about at NYU. So we're very, 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 very excited to be there. We got some cool stuff made up for this. And our Oceans Photography See the World contest just ended. So we're releasing the names of the winners on Sunday. My team and I are going through the photos as we speak. And everyone who wins receives a 10 by 2020 mug, which we got finally from the mail. The mailroom was not too happy with me because I live in a dorm. I got 100 mugs shipped to my dorm. So who knew how much 100 mugs weighed? Not me. So we're very excited for these upcoming events. And we're hoping that as the weather turns nicer, we'll get to do some real hands-on events. Specifically, I've been speaking with the Coastal Steward Organization on Long Island, and we're thinking about doing a beach cleanup. We're thinking about claiming a beach, getting a lot of volunteers out there, both from Stony Brook, from surrounding schools, from 10 by 2020, and from the Coastal Steward themselves. and spending an entire day to clean up the beach for this community. So we're really excited for that. We just have to wait for it to, like, you know, stop snowing and, like, raining and, like, wind blowing. So once it's nice out, which knock on wood on that, we should be good. But it was really exciting to see everyone's photos because it plays into this whole global perspectives. We got photos of lakes and of oceans from here to Mexico to someone had sent in a photo from Israel. So it's really, really interesting to see how all these waters are connected and yet can be so very, very different. So wanted to see if I could, not gonna work, darn it. There was a post just a couple of, like, about 10 days ago in 15 award-winning photos of the ocean's chaotic beauty, and I was hoping that they would have it in a slideshow that I could show it, but they don't. So once again, that's something I will post on, because these, of course, are professional photographers, but to see this craziness of the ocean is really, really cool, especially because they're from all over. Italy, the Philippines, New Zealand, Florida, France, Norway, just all over. Hawaii was actually the top winner, a photo from Hawaii, Indonesian Sea. Oh, wait. Nope, that's not what I was looking for. Never mind. Got excited. So let's pull up the next thing we wanted to talk about. Where'd you go? Okay, so I'm a little nervous that I'm not going to get to our action steps, so I'm going to talk about it now, just in case we run over a little bit. And once again, I'll make this available. But this action step is actually courtesy of Greenpeace, and it's called Hands Off, and it's their Ocean Protection Petition, which is really interesting. So it's this petition that you can sign, and it's an idea to support Greenpeace's plan to protect 40% of the world's oceans as marine reserves, which is 4 times the amount that 10 by 2020 is rooting for. So this is really, really great. They know that marine reserves are vital to restoring the health of the rapidly declining oceans. Marine reserves can help restore marine biodiversity and put endangered species and broken habitats onto the road of recovery. So if we make a marine reserve, it provides a safe haven for marine life and gives them the freedom to spawn, mate, and feed without the pressures of capture or habitat loss. So it's this really great petition, and you can sign online, which I'll make available in the group chat right now. But they are challenging almost the United Nations to do more than just the 10%. They want to see 40%, which would be great. They want to show that the marine reserves are critical to the ocean's future, to put an end to the global fisheries decline and put an end to the global destruction of our oceans. And it's kind of interesting that I actually did not know about this until a couple of days ago through Greenpeace. And because I knew that Greenpeace, of course, was a very powerful and very strong organization, but I never really associated them with the oceans before now. So they're a really great organization. I always say, like, if you can get involved with them, that would be really, really cool. They do a lot of different things. What? Sorry?
I'm sorry, did you say Greenpeace?
Yes, Greenpeace.
Okay. Oh, I just wanted to add something because since you said that you did previously not know that they did stuff with the ocean environment as well. Mm-hmm. That's actually a little weird because the only way that I know Greenpeace is through their through their marine programs. Yeah, that's actually how I know it. So that's I found that a little bit funny.
Yeah, I had only ever kind of heard of Greenpeace from protecting forests and global warming and even sustainable food perspective. Mm-hmm. I had never really, all the stuff that I had read about them were within those systems. So I was really excited to kind of pop onto their website and see they have a tab for protecting our oceans. So
I remember.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
A while ago, it was like there was a huge things with the whales or dolphins in Japan or something like that. And I remember Greenpeace made this whole big fuss about it, and that's actually how I came to find out about them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I like I said, I kind of just realized that they have a very large ocean kind of page, and I was looking at their videos and saw that not only are they trying to go for sustainable seafood and marine reserves, but they cover preventing ocean pollution and ocean issues and threats, which I think is really, really cool. So I'm so excited because it's another site for me to kind of look at and see what videos they have and kind of help them promote their work. So
I'm sorry, Emily, real quick. I just tried to sign the petition,
Mm-hmm.
but after I click, oh no, never mind. It just went because the first time I clicked sign, it said an error, but I just clicked it again and it went. Never mind.
It's good. Cool.
Yeah, we're good.
I made sure it was active because I know I had tried to get everyone to sign a petition that had closed the day before, so it was active this time. Doing good. Doing great. And I also, this was relatively new from our last forum to now. There was a new study released that they think by 2050 there will be more plastic in the oceans than fish by weight, which I'm actually not surprised about because, as we know, we're running out of fish. So by like the year 2048 to 2050, there'll be virtually no fish left in our oceans. So it kind of makes sense that plastic will outweigh it. The thing that I find terrifying is the majority of the plastics in the ocean are microscopic. They actually cannot be seen by the human eye. They're the tiny beads that you get in your face washes, although not for much longer. Or they're pieces of plastic that have been through degradation from the sun, and they're exceptionally small. So all these tiny little pieces of plastic will, they think, at some point outweigh the weight of fish. This is terrifying unless we learn how to eat plastic. And even when we do learn how to eat plastic, it's still really scary that you could be taking a cruise and instead of swimming with the dolphins or swimming with the fishes, you're swimming with balloons and with plastic water bottles. That's not for a good picture. That's not for a good memory. Some of my favorite memories are being in the ocean surrounded by fish, not by plastic. So, but there is really interesting a ocean cleanup device that was created by I believe he's 21 years old. And he has pretty much come up with a way to clean the oceans. Hold on, I need to find the video because it is so ingenious that it almost hurts. Let me look it up.
I know who you're talking about. I believe he started the project when he was like 16.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me do the screen share.
Oh, I see Jonathan has to leave. Bye.
Hey.
Thanks
Bye,
for
Jonathan.
Bye. Oh yeah, I just want to say one last thing before I go. I actually just watched that video too because
Yes.
you shared it, Emily.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I was impressed.
I was
Hopefully
so happy.
I can, steer us in the right direction. Bye, guys.
Bye. I think it's just us.
I think, yeah, we had a caller from Spain, and I think the time difference.
I was going to say, I know that the time difference is a little funky.
Yeah. Do you know if the maritime people were going to tune in at like 6:30? Or not sure. I mean, I'm all ears.
I mean, like, I can still go. I can still go. Have you seen the video?
No, I haven't.
Oh, so good. Totally going to watch it. It's going to be on Facebook. Don't mind that.
Ooh, yes.
I know. Make it big screen. Full screen. There we go.
I was 16 years old and I was diving in Greece, and suddenly I realized that I came across more plastic bags than fish. I thought, well, why can't we just clean this up? So then I came up with this passive system that's attached to the seabed and really allows the ocean to clean itself. In the past, the story has always been, okay, we can't clean it up, so the best thing we can do is not make it worse. So sure, we should prevent more plastic from entering the oceans, but that's not a solution for the plastics already trapped in these offshore gyres. There are 5 areas in which the plastic in the ocean concentrates. They are called gyres. And the current there rotates. Because it's positioned in an angle, in a V shape, plastic gets pushed towards the center, becoming 100,000 times more concentrated. Most of the plastic right now is in the big stuff, so hasn't yet fragmented down to those microplastics, which means it's actually easier to clean up than we thought it would be, and we can still clean it up before it turns into these very dangerous microplastics. And now we've been able to show that with one system, in 10 years' time, we can clean up half the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
So I thought that video was really interesting, but my big concern is he has this idea of kind of claiming an area of the ocean and concentrating the plastics to make for an easier cleanup. But what happens to that area? Because as we know, fish don't just stay in one place. They have migrations. They travel thousands of miles every year, whether it's just for food or for spawning. And we know birds also travel, and they require kind of places to sit and to kind of catch their breath. So the idea that he has is great, but I'm just concerned with what are we doing with these very concentrated areas of plastic.
So they're going to concentrate the plastic and they're not going to suction it out?
They're going to concentrate it, and then eventually they're going to suction the plastic out. But if it takes a week to get all of the plastic in one area, what will happen in that week? Will it mess up patterns, or if it takes longer even? Because what you're doing, it's a very smart idea in the sense of you are kind of collecting all of the plastic so it's in a smaller space so you can get to it easier instead of having to reach all over. But what happens to that very small space after time?
Are there studies that examine how the Pacific Garbage Patch has disrupted like migratory birds and fish environments?
It's more fish. The problem being that it's difficult for the fish to swim through the patch, and it's also dangerous for them because these microplastics, what ends up happening is they consume them and it tells their stomach that they're full, when in actuality there are 0 nutrients in microplastics. So they end up starving. They end up eating so much plastic that they starve to death, which is kind of a weird concept.
Yeah.
But there does seem to disrupt them a bit, and this is kind of closer to the shore because the Pacific Patch isn't really all that far offshore. So it's not as deep as some of the other areas I believe he's talking about. I think it's a great idea, and I think it will work. I'm just apprehensive as to how well it's going to work.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of it is, oh, this young kid is brilliant, and then people just get kind of carried away.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe another brilliant girl will come in and figure out what's a good system for complementing his.
Yeah. And even like there's a lot going on with the plastics movement right now, especially because there was just that idea of we're going to have by weight more plastic than fish. And it's interesting how there seems to be in the community, no one seems to focus on all the plastics. So for example, there is, it's called Balloons Blow, and it's the ugly truth. And it's about how balloons kill wildlife, they pollute the earth, they waste helium, and a lot of the balloons end up in the ocean, and it's this latex that is very thin and can degrade very quickly. So there's like a whole organization dedicated just to not having people release balloons in the wild into the environment. They found that the number of balloon pieces of the world have tripled in the past like 10 years. So there's like a whole organization dedicated solely to balloons. And then there's a whole other organization that I was reading about dedicated solely to plastic silverware and getting rid of that, and the idea of kind of either making it so it's recyclable or that people can clean it. It's just like, why are there so many little subgroups? Why can't we all just come together and say like no plastics in general? I don't know if it would be more productive to have everyone kind of come together, or if these little groups seem to work. I don't know. Anyone have an opinion on that? I'm gonna put
I guess
this.
it's difficult to track exactly where they're all coming from. And maybe the collection process is different weight-wise, or the collection process for that.
Yeah. It's just like, before this year, I never knew that there was a whole group dedicated to just saying no to balloons. Like, I feel like I learned at a really young age, like, don't let go of your balloon, because one, you're not going to have a balloon anymore. And like, two, it's going to go into the air or like into the forest, or it's going to go somewhere where it doesn't belong. So, in fact, there was a whole movement on Valentine's Day to skip the balloons out of fear that they would be released into like the wild, essentially, and affect the different systems. So it was a whole like Valentine's Day, say no to balloons, but also say no to like flowers that aren't native to your land. So
this is just for those that are being improperly disposed of?
The way that I understand it is, don't buy balloons at all because they're still latex. But when you release them, they tend to end up either in the ocean and then washed up on the shore. And not only is the plastic themselves dangerous, but if they still have the string attached to them, different species can get kind of mixed up, caught up into it, and end up either suffocating or drowning, something like that. So there's a rumor, I guess, that people have been believing that latex balloons are supposedly biodegradable, when in actuality it takes about 4 years for a latex balloon to biodegrade. So it might degrade, but it's not what's considered biodegradable. So it's not. And the problem is also that if the balloon was to pop, you now have small pieces of balloon, which just end up photodegrading quicker. So you have those little pieces of plastic. And it's very interesting how many issues there are. They've been known, balloons that have been split have been known to be mistaken as jellyfish and have been eaten by species that would normally eat jellyfish because it looks like jellyfish. They've been put into nests, thinking that it's a filler for nests. So these babies grow up kind of chewing on balloons, these baby birds. They don't look pretty, like when they're floating in the water, to be honest. So it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but it is. And also, like, and in my opinion, the saddest, if a balloon splits like this, it can get caught around the necks of different species, like seals, and it can rub them raw to the point of either getting infected or even choking them. So it's like, who would have thought? Balloons. So I put that the website for this group, balloonsblow.org, in the group chat, and I'll also post that into the Facebook page. So they have like a little thing to like print out a certificate for kids, and it says like, we made the promise, and they will never like let go of balloons. And it's interesting. It's actually been like an international thing. So people from like the United States, from the Netherlands, from Australia, have all printed out these little certificates and made a promise. And it's meant for kids because, of course, kids' birthday parties or kids are more likely to have balloons than like adults. So it's kind of getting this on the radar. If I don't move around enough in this room, the lights think I'm not here and they turn off on me. I think I would have known that by now. So, but yeah, and for anyone who just like joined us, we talked about this because there's a video circulating the web about an ocean cleanup project that is hopefully going to start by 2020. And it's actually created by someone who right now is 21 years old. And it looks like a good idea, but of course there are some apprehensions on how will this affect the waterways and how will it affect the marine environment. So that's where this whole topic about balloons came up, with plastic. And it was, oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, Celine, did you want to say something?
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I must be hearing things. And the other thing is that a report was released, I think it was the beginning of this month or the end of January, that says by the year 2050, plastic will soon outweigh fish in our waters, which is not all that surprising, which I think is actually really terrifying because we're running out of fish as is. So the idea that plastics will one day outweigh the fish that we're slowly getting rid of kind of seems like, yeah, that's going to happen. But so we're kind of trying to give up plastics. And there's actually a great, I've done it before. It's 1 month challenge to get rid of plastics. And every week you focus on a different part. So like week 1, you get rid of plastic containers entirely. And that's all you focus on for week 1. Like no plastic containers, no plastic spoons or forks or knives, which living in a dorm is infinitely more difficult. Then you work on getting rid of any plastic carrier bags, plastic on your different, like even just the other day I bought a shampoo and a conditioner, and of course they were attached to each other, covered in plastic, and I was like, why though? Why can't I just buy them separately? And it's a month-long project that it's a challenge that people take in an attempt to get rid of plastics in their lives. So it's very difficult. I'm not gonna lie, but it's really interesting because you get to see how much plastic you really do use. Because I would be like in the shop and I'd pick something up and be like, can't buy that, it's plastic. Or I'd be like on my campus trying to eat something and I would have to eat it like out of the bowl because I can't use a plastic spoon and I forgot my spoon. So it's a fun challenge that I suggest everyone take if you don't get frustrated easily. If you do get frustrated easily, do not do it. So, and I'm very happy to say that Dr. Tara Ryder has just signed on. Hi.
Hello.
We are so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Not a problem.
So the theme of our forum this month is global perspectives, and I thought that having a maritime historian would be a great way to round this all out. So if you can tell us a bit about your background and research. Did you always know that you wanted to be a maritime historian?
No.
Cool.
I actually started out as an undergrad as a marine science/biology major. Yeah. Still one of my many loves. I did get my bachelor's of science in both marine science and bio, but I picked up along the way history. And over the years, I worked in both fields. I worked as a marine science researcher, and then I worked in the history fields. And really, the one thing I knew without a doubt is that I am happiest on, in, near, around the sea. That's been my background. That's, having served in the Coast Guard kind of makes sense why I went into the Coast Guard. So again, everything kind of kept coming back to the water. And so the best way for me to kind of combine my two loves was by doing maritime history and studying how environment interacts with society, but the environment I'm most interested in is the maritime environment. Cool. So it was a windy path, but it got me here.
But those are the best paths. It's always
They
fun.
are, and ultimately it all built on each other.
Yeah. So maritime history is kind of, I personally, before I met you, had never even thought about it as a thing, because history is it's a very broad subject. So can you tell us some concepts about maritime history, so how humans have really shaped our environment from an ocean's perspective?
I mean, first and foremost, I mean, environment shapes what we eat. It shapes how we live. It shapes what clothing we wear. It shapes not only our jobs, but I mean, think about your free time. I know being here on Long Island, who goes to the beach in the summertime? Or it's kind of easier to say who doesn't, or who doesn't do something around it. So the waterways definitely shape our lifestyle. And if you go back historically, and even today, this is where people live. Today, 39%, as of like 2010, 39% of the American population lives in a coastal area. And we have to be clear, because that's just coastal. That doesn't include the rivers. It doesn't include the lakes. So, a significant portion of our population lives on the water, especially when you realize that it's only about 10% of the landmass of what we think of as the United States. And if you look, worldwide, 44% of our population lives within about 100 miles. And it does shape where we live. I mean, the fact is, everyone's taken, Western Civ probably at some point, and where did every society start? It started on a river, or it started near the water. And it's because ultimately, while we often define ourselves land-based, we need that maritime environment. People were farmers when they first arrived in Long Island, but without clamming and scalloping and the eelgrass, those early societies would never have survived. So it is about those types of interactions and studying ultimately why it worked and where it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. So earlier in the forum, we talked about kind of the difference of culture in the oceans. We talked about both how people fished and even what they believed about the ocean, so different gods and goddesses and deities. Do you see a lot of difference between cultures in their use of the environment?
Specifically, I'm assuming you mean the maritime environment. Yes. There is definitely the emphasis. There's a healthy respect. We talk a lot about like man versus nature, but when you're working on the water, when you're at sea, it does create a different type of society. If you look at society that's actually on the water versus society near the water, but still land-based, at sea, it is very much man versus nature. So even if that other man is your enemy, which enemy is greater? And its nature will win. Mm-hmm. It does force people to work together, because ultimately we know in the long run we may win a battle. I don't think we can say we win the war against nature. There's enough instances of her rearing her head, Hurricane Sandy, that it shapes how people interact with each other. And it's whenever we start to forget that man is not on top, the sea likes to remind us. I mean, we do recognize that, still today, fishing is considered one of the most dangerous industries. Here on Long Island, sadly, we've lost people in the past year to fishing accidents, even with all the modern technology, with the Coast Guard, with GPS. Nature's it's still a battle, even on those simple things. So, it does shape, I think, a lot of relationships, not just man and nature, but ultimately man and man. There's a forced balance. And you can see this historically. The abolition movement, a lot of abolitionists, they were said to have rolled out of the forecastle, out of the forecastle of a ship, because on a ship it didn't matter whether you were white, black, Indian. It was a matter of could you do the task, because ultimately there was that survival. So it does allow certain opportunities that might not exist elsewhere.
I never even thought about that, how you kind of can't pick and choose your friends if you're on a boat and your goal is to get from point A to point B alive.
And there's also a limiting factor. Unlike land, if you take a job and you go, God, I don't like this job, you walk away. On a boat, you walk away. You're stuck. I mean, whaling ships, people went on these vessels and they were on them on average 3 to 4 years. Longest voyage out of Long Island was 11 years. So guess what? Even if you don't like the people you're with, you're stuck with them.
Whether you like it or not.
For the most part, you're not about to jump overboard.
Only if it gets really bad.
But, you know, you have to recognize that it does force, maybe you don't like them, but you learn to live with them. So there is a certain sense of community that comes out of these types of cultures. And ultimately, what's created on the water does shape the society back on land as well, in the sense that those men are shifting back and forth.
Cool. So how important was this idea of sea power in shaping our current world, either from a global perspective or even just from here?
I mean, both locally and globally, there's a phrase that scholars often use that trade is the lifeblood of civilization. Trade has always been easiest via the waterways. You can go back to early colonial America, down in like the Chesapeake area. You couldn't go over land to get your tobacco to the ports. You went by, you know, the waterways. And even today, if you go into New York City, go down to the south part of Manhattan and look at all of the container ships. Thousands of containers come in every day because it's still cheaper to transport. So without sea power, you don't have economies. You don't have, you know, any of this. It's the basis of our society, of, you know, kind of pushing ideas along. And ultimately, you know, trade does lead to naval forces. It leads to ultimately exploration. People looking for new resources, new ports to sail into. So it's definitely critical, both in our historic past, but ultimately it's still part of today. I mean, the oceans make up the largest part of our world, but it's also, I think too often people think of the oceans, and I think it's been taught that way, they divided people. This is why America, the US became independent, was it was so far from England. Most people during those periods actually thought of it as a highway, not as a separation, because it was easier to travel by water than by land. And, you know, it's still part of our society today. Often we aren't cognizant of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we look inward or landward more often, but you can't get away from those sea connections.
So how do you think maybe like, do you think that there'll be a shift in power when it comes to the ocean in the next couple of years, especially because we're seeing a lot more big business fishing? We see, instead of small kind of fishing for your family, we have fishing for your family and the entire country and shipping it abroad because everyone needs that one type of fish that you can't get in our waters.
You know, it's interesting because I think too often we've thought of fishing, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. It's not that fishing has not been at a subsistence level,
mm-hmm.
but fishing was always part of trade. People didn't just fish for themselves for the most part. It was always about fishing and who you were selling for. And ultimately, it's always been at a global level. You know, kind of the question of who discovered the New World. And, you know, obviously, I think most scholars agree it was not Christopher Columbus, that there'd been contact before. But, you know, it's the questions of who. Was it the Irish, the Vikings? But we also know the Basques were already over in the Newfoundland area because that's where the codfish was. And they were fishing in those waters because that's what was needed in Europe for trade. And this wasn't a society that was wealthy. This was really about survival. It was subsistence, but ultimately it was still this kind of larger scope. So what we're seeing today is not, it didn't suddenly change from little tiny fish into these fishing factories. Have gotten bigger.
Mm-hmm.
The scale of fishing, in a large part because population has gotten bigger. But the idea is not new. I mean, technology is definitely shaping it. So I don't necessarily see that that's going to change. It's really what's been there. It's a matter of how technology plays a role in it. And ultimately, again, the legal, you know, how much is too much? I mean, that's a question that obviously is kind of big in environmental studies of any type.
Yeah. So what do you think, in your opinion, is the biggest threat our oceans face today? If you could only choose one.
It depends if you're going for a physical threat, which I would say without a doubt is plastic. a huge influence. And, obviously it's, especially in the last few years, I think gained a huge amount of public attention. I mean, how many people have heard of the great garbage patch in the Pacific? But the problem is what people imagine, and actually what most of the pictures indicate on media isn't actually what you're seeing. It's not visible plastic that we have to be concerned about. It's the microscopic. And ultimately how that's entering the various levels of our ecosystem and the food chain. And realizing we're ingesting it, and personally I don't think I should be eating plastic. But I also think, and this is where I'm kind of torn, because that's a very physical threat. Mm-hmm. I also think some of the threat is a certain amount of, and I'm not sure this is the right word, apathy. So kind of more people are reacting, oh, we can't do anything. This is the easy way. When I came into this conversation, you were talking about how hard it is to get around plastic. And I've taken that challenge before, by the way. And it is a challenge. And
it's so frustrated by like week 2.
Well, and it's, and I've made a concerted effort. I teach with the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. I'm with the Sustainability Studies program at Stony Brook University. So obviously this is part of what I believe in. And my family, we recycle pretty much about 90% of everything we have, and we compost, we create very little waste. And yet we have to recognize there's still so much plastic. How do you get around it? You go grocery shopping and you can't get anything. But I think that's where the apathy comes in. As you said, if it's too hard, don't do it.
Yeah.
And I think too often that is what does exist of, I can't do anything, so I'm not going to do nothing. And I'd rather see someone make a small effort. Mm-hmm. And, I admit, my students will tell you I love my Mountain Dew. But, I've made a concerted effort to bring my metal bottle of, drink, so that, I'm using less, waste materials. And I'm not a fan of water. It does not have caffeine in it. But is it the smarter thing? And so kind of thinking along those lines. And I think it's just the fear that people get overwhelmed. Mm. So apathy in that sense of going, I can't do anything, so why try? And I think even though we have to recognize little changes take a whole lot to actually make a long-term impact, I think the mental frame that comes with little changes is what's critical for people not to forget about.
I agree. After taking the challenge, I started to carry around silverware with me in my backpack. And I actually just got back from California, and on my way there, I forgot to take my fork and knife out of my backpack, and I got stopped by TSA. And they were like, why? And I was like, because I can't use plastics. And they both, the lovely TSA agent looked at me, just kind of like nodded and put it back into my bag.
Wait, you got it through with a knife?
It was like a butter knife. It was a butter knife and a fork, and they were just like, and put it back in my bag. So,
I would have to say, A, you're lucky on that. Let's just be honest. But no, yeah. But it is true of the recognition that when you start to make those changes, eventually they just become common sense. I will admit, if you look in my computer bag, there's a knife and fork and spoon. I
came prepared. Like, it's making these small changes. It might be difficult at first, but then I find myself doing it inherently. Even my roommate, who is not affiliated in sustainable studies, environmental science in any way, she started to use reusable water bottles because I yelled at her. There were so many plastic water bottles in our room. It's like, why? But why? Like, why can't you just go and save money and buy a bottle? Like, we live in New York. The water is delicious.
Well, I think part of it is people have been brought up that the water is better, it's cleaner, it's somehow better. And we do have to recognize, in Long Island, we're particularly lucky, the water system. Coming from the Midwest, I will admit, I never liked water because it was really soft. So it was like, so you drank bottled water because, God, it tasted awful. And that's just a personal thing on mine, so sorry if anyone likes soft water. But it is about making those small changes, and sometimes you have to figure what gets people to do it. My husband's doing it because, well, he doesn't have a choice. But it's become a habit. Because I kept yelling at him every time he threw a bottle away and didn't put it in the recycle bin. We have like 5 bins in front, so you can sort everything. But you also have to recognize sometimes there is a sense of ease, and that is not necessarily apathy, but often economics. And I think it's easy to judge someone, why haven't they done that? And recognize sometimes there is an economic insight why it's not easier to do it that way. And that's what we have to figure out, how to make it feasible to make these types of changes.
I agree. I was talking with a friend who is going to be a orientation leader of the summer, and she said, why are we giving out shirts that we know they're going to get for free anyway? Why can't we hand out something like a lunch bag or a water bottle, something that they might not get for free? And we have on our campus these water bottle filling stations that are filtered water, and you just stick your bottle underneath it and it fills in. It tells you how many plastic water bottles this unit has saved in however many days or months. So it's kind of, maybe we can switch very slowly. And
it is. And again, we do have to recognize, and I'll have to put that out there, is that t-shirts are cheap. They're actually cheaper than things like water bottles. And so that's one of the things, when I went into maritime and environmental studies, I never realized I was going into economics. And we do have to recognize economics drives people's decisions, whether it's on an individual level or on a national level. And as much as we'd like to say, oh, it shouldn't, it does. Is it cheaper to buy that organic food versus the non-organic? You may want to buy the thing with less plastic, but because it took more manufacturing to get it to fit there, it's the more expensive item. Things like that. Or do you give out a free t-shirt or a water bottle? So again, figuring out how to make this work. Where can you cut? Where can you not cut?
So one of my favorite quotes about history is, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. From your studies, what is one thing we should remember moving forward when we're talking about ocean sciences and policy?
One thing. You keep hitting me with one thing.
I know. I'm making it a challenge. It's like the plastic challenge.
I've done that one. I thought I had hit the challenge. The one thing that ultimately society is dependent on the maritime environment. I think, especially if you study like traditional American history, if you take just that survey of American history 1 or 2, there's usually very little emphasis on the water. It's like the Puritans crossed the ocean and then they settled down and they were farmers, and you kind of ignore that whole past and kind of forget, they had to cross it and what it took to cross it. And then, there was the whole, manifest destiny, expansion west, and it's all about the land. And the fact is, the only reason they could do that is the railroads were being funded by the fishing industry and by the trade that was going overseas. So I guess my point is to remember that ultimately, whether it's conscious, here on Long Island, the water is in our face, literally, all around us. Coming from Ohio, it's very easy to forget about the oceans. You're so far inland, but ultimately it still shapes our society. And I think that's the critical part, is not to look landward or get that narrowed focus, but to recognize that we screw up our oceans and our waterways. We screw up the foundation of our societies. Not just this one, but historic societies all came from those roots. And if you don't have a place to put the roots down, you're, well, not even without a paddle. You're in more trouble than that.
And then my final question, if I remember correctly, some of your research, and I believe your dissertation, was on pirates.
Yes,
Why pirates? Besides they're all...
Well, we do have to admit, I mean, when they talk about, pick a sexy topic for your dissertation, not only did I hit pirates, I got a female pirate. So, kind of got to check all those boxes. Actually, there was kind of twofold reasons. I was interested in maritime society, so there was obviously that element to it. But I had worked on a schooner, the Harvey Gamich. It's a replica of a 19th century sailing schooner. and we took students on board as a teaching school. And we always got the International Maritime Board updates for piracy, because since we do have students, obviously we'd like to make sure our students are safe. And to me, it was kind of fascinating. For the most part, we were in waters that were not particularly high risk, but you get your local waters and then you get the international report. And at the time, this was in, the 90s, piracy really wasn't something on the American news front. I think the last few years we've heard more about like piracy down in Somalia. The fact is we've got piracy a whole lot closer at home. The Gulf of Mexico has become a huge issue with piracy. And we've had Americans taken and we've had Americans killed. It's still not quite making the news. And even the piracy that made with Somalia, we were a couple of years behind like Europeans being aware of these things. So it kind of fascinated me, the economic angle. And then obviously being a female on board any working vessels, you're actually in a minority. Hold on, my lights just went off.
I do that all the time. Don't worry, I've been doing that.
You're in a minority. Sailing within the sailing, kind of the schooner crews, they make up only about 5 to 7% at the time. It's increased, luckily. But there were certain challenges, and we have to recognize historically women were not at sea in the same way. So that kind of got me interested in women at sea, piracy, and so of course I had to find out where there are female pirates. And I come from a very Irish background, and could remember folk songs talking about Grania Whale, an Irish pirate queen. And to be honest, I thought she was a myth. Turns out she's not. And she was a pretty amazing figure who lived the same lifespan as Elizabeth I. They met each other. And it really does show the fact that she could have that type of power in the 16th century. She was not royalty. I mean, she was the daughter of a chieftain. She married 2 chieftains, but that's very different from saying Elizabeth I of England. And yet she held her own and was respected by men throughout Ireland and in England. And it really came from the ability to, I don't quite want to say control the seas, but ultimately her power on the water gave her power on land. So that was where my interest came.
That is so cool. Like that is really awesome. All right, I'll open it up
in about a year or so when the book comes out.
Yes. You'll have to send us the link to.
I will do that without a doubt.
I'm going to open up the floor to questions if anyone has. You can unmute yourselves. Let's see. Okay.
Hi, I had a question. Thank you for joining us. That was fascinating. So I was wondering, I know pretty much next to nothing about this topic, but how would using our oceans unsustainably impact the trade through waterways for things like other than fish? Like, let's say we're just transporting materials. Why would we
care
through the ocean? Yeah.
Actually, it does actually come back down to economics, and it's what we're seeing in places like Somalia, where they've had extensive overfishing in some of those waters. And there's also, we do have to recognize, typically when you get piracy, you get a rise in economic and political turmoil, which obviously that part of Africa has dealt with extensively. But the fact is, if you can't fish, you have no way of supporting yourself. So if you have trade boats going back and forth across the waters in front of you, what are you going to do? You're going to attack them. And this is where we see the rise in piracy. And that becomes then an economic struggle, and it involves military forces. We do have to recognize piracy is seen as a crime against humanity. So it doesn't matter where that event takes place. Any country has the right to prosecute, which is why, I guess it was about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, the Somalian pirates did not attack an American vessel. They were tried in New York City because it is considered a crime against everyone. And it has to do with recognizing that trade does link these countries together, but ultimately it's about recognizing, if people can't survive, and that includes having access to the waters. One of the things to keep in mind, and this is both recent and also, historic, you think back to the Puritans. They're They're farmers. They plant their crops in the spring. What do they do until the fall to eat? They need the waterways. I mean, and so if you don't have access to food, you're going to look for other resources, and that's going to cause economic turmoil. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That was a beautiful connection you made. I couldn't for the life of me figure out how that could be correlated.
It is, because we go, oh, that's totally separate. That's living species, and this is trade, which is, already kind of, inorganic materials or steel, and, what do they have to do? But ultimately, you disrupt the system in one area, and it reverberates right across the paths.
I should probably unmute myself. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yep, go ahead.
Before you joined us, Emily was talking a bit about some organizations like the ones for balloons and plastic bags, I think you mentioned, and how those organizations are kind of far in between and stagnant, and they have different focuses. I was wondering if you foresaw in the future those organizations kind of coming together, or what kind of things would push policy making to make change happen?
I think it's gonna, I do think if you look historically over like the environmental movement, it started, in the 19th century, you see the rise in the ideas of preservation and conservation. And conservation often was focused on, I'm going to save this tree, this park. And people started going, well, that's important, but what about all those other green spaces? So you saw the rise of the environmental movement, which had that kind of broader policy of, we need to put in regulations across the board. We then saw a pushback, because sometimes when they're so broad, you do lose space. You have a great picture of the forest, but you lose it. So I think right now we're kind of looking at this point at the individual trees and going, we need to look at the forest. So I think it will develop that you'll start to see more interaction, more kind of broader scope policies. But again, it comes down to a balance. Too broad and you get yourself into as much trouble as too narrow. So, whether it's simply the plastic bags versus the bottles. So I think we will start to see broader policies, but I'm also not going to be surprised when it kind of goes back the opposite way. I think it's a pendulum in which it's really hard to find the center point. I don't know if that makes sense, and I apologize. I think I'm having a bad connection at the moment.
Sounded good to me.
Okay.
Is there any other questions from anyone?
Hi, I don't have any questions, but I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned about the challenge. And are you going to post that on the? I had to call, so I'm not on the chat. But will you post that on your page on Facebook, or send an email out?
Yeah, I'll do. I definitely will post it on the page, and I'll send an email out. The lights. Sorry, the lights keep turning off on me. Yeah, I'll definitely send it out. And it's the one that I do, it takes it week by week to get rid of the plastic. So it's not like you're throwing yourself into a no plastic land at once, because then it gets very stressful, and it's a great challenge. So I will definitely post that and email it out for sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sounds good.
No problem. We are nearing the end of our time. Thank you so much, Dr. Ryder, for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely.
So, and as usual, there will be a recording of this conversation, of this forum. For anyone who missed it, I'll be posting it and emailing it out. So if you want to either look back, or if some people have conflicts in time, both because of classes and time differences, it is available there. So I'll make sure everyone gets that copy.
If anyone has questions for me, please contact me.
Cool stuff. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm trying to end this. Have a good
button.
I don't know how to
Bye-bye.
honest answer.
There's a button on the bottom right hand that says leave meeting. I think that might be it. Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, thanks, Emily.